I took a $50 investment and turned it into a retail chain with 4 stores, 15 employees, 50,000 customers, and $2.2 million in sales. And then I lost it all in one day. All of it gone like that. I've been sitting on this story for 5.5 years. It's a story that is going to be difficult to tell. I've been an entrepreneur or entrepreneurial my entire adult life. I started my first business at 19. It was a lawn service, and I've had over 20 businesses in my lifetime. Truth be told, most of those businesses failed. That's just part of the game, for me at least. A lot of times I would have a full-time job, and then I would also have a side business, like a side hustle. And that's just been my entire life. Well, those of you who have watched my videos know I'm an artist, but I'm also an entrepreneur, which is 2 separate things. And I'm also somebody that's worked corporate jobs most of my life. If you watched the video, the worst thing that ever happened to me at my job, I had a career that I loved. I had to leave my career for a very sketchy reason, and it was very devastating. I had to go home and tell my family that I lost my job. And what I didn't tell you in that video was when I came home to tell my family that I had lost my job and my career, within 1 week of that happening, my first wife decided she didn't want to be with me anymore and divorced me. And so I had a lot going on there, and it was not a good time for me. I ended up being displaced. I had to leave my home. I lost everything that I owned, basically, my house. I lost my kids, at least living with me for two solid years. And I ended up being homeless for a very short time. I don't really like to talk about that. That was how this whole thing started. That was the beginning of it. So that was 2007. In 2010, I decided to start a small business. I was living in a loft apartment, and this loft really had what I would call the wow factor. It was just absolutely stunning, and I was renting it from a friend. I didn't own it, and the rent was really cheap. I think I was only paying $800 a month for that loft. At the time, I had been working at Lazy Boy Furniture as a sales manager, and a friend of mine had called me on the phone, somebody I hadn't talked to in probably about 6 months, and she had been in Nashville, Tennessee. And she called me and said, I went to this business in Nashville, and you have to see this business. This has your name written all over it. So me being the entrepreneur that I am, I looked up the business. At the time, she was an artist, and this was the only artist in the country that was doing this. I found the business online, I got on their website, and I made a reservation for myself to go to one of these events. I drove, it was about 4.5 hours from Illinois to get down to Nashville. It was a party, basically, around the concept of bringing your own drinks and snacks, and you do a painting. And it was, at the time, that was a 2-hour party, and it was a new concept. It was pretty awesome. I really had a great time at this party, and I got done there around 9 p.m. and drove all the way home, another 4.5 hours, and I had to go to work the next day. And so I went to work, and everything changed at that point, because I knew this was something that I really, really wanted to do. And there was just something about it that clicked with me, and it was just perfect. It fit my life as an artist, and it fit my life as an entrepreneur, and it was the perfect business model for me to start. So the next day at work, all I could think about was this art party business. And I was trying to explain it to people, and it was hard to explain at the time because there wasn't any. This was the only one in the country. And so basically I was the second artist to start doing these art parties, second person in America anyway. And so I started working on my concept. I wanted to make it different than the one I went to in Nashville. So I storyboarded this whole business onto a big trifold black storyboard. I came up with the name. I was going to call it Sips and Splatters. I storyboarded my concept. I showed it to some affluent people in my downtown city area that were business owners, and they loved the idea. I just wanted to get their feedback more than anything else. I wasn't looking for a loan or backing or anything like that. In fact, I never took out a loan the entire 10 years we were in business. The business funded itself. I never took out a loan. I never borrowed any money. So I decided, I had the concept, I had the name, I got the website URL, and I decided to have my first art party. So I called a couple friends from high school. These were people that I went to high school with. And we got about 8 people together for this first art party in my loft apartment. And I made a table, and I got some chairs, and I figured out what kind of music I wanted to play. And this was around Christmas time. The 8 friends came over to the loft. They brought their own drinks and snacks, and we had an art party, and it was really, really fun. It was so much fun. Everybody loved it. I got lots of pictures, and I started a Facebook page. This was 2010, so Facebook was really just kind of coming along. And so the parties grew, and I met more and more people. So every time I had a party, I would meet people, and then somebody in that group would want to have their own private party with their family and friends, so they would book their private party. And the thing just started snowballing. I built 2 more tables, got a bunch of chairs. I was going to thrift stores and things, buying chairs. Incidentally, I started this business with a $50 investment in some art supplies. That was basically it. And that's how I started the business. I never took out a loan. And for 10 years, this business funded itself and paid for itself and its own expansion. The loft eventually was holding 24 people. It was a very organic form of growing a business. The loft was somewhat of an incubator for the business. I was taking the cash I made every night, putting it in a shoebox, and putting it behind my dresser in my apartment, and then I would just go back to work, and the whole thing just kept going and going and going. I never counted the money in the shoebox. I just let it stack up. And I was making really good money at Lazy Boy, so I was making about $75K a year there, and then doing these parties part-time on my days off on the side. And about 4 months in to running this business in my apartment by myself, I met a woman who came to one of my events, and her name was Chris. There was just something about her. I had been single for a pretty long time, kind of gave up on dating somewhat. Well, I actually really did just give up on dating, truth be told. And I met Chris at one of my events. There was only 6 people at that event. She wasn't dressed up and fancy, and there was just something about her, and we ended up hitting it off, and that's a whole different story, but we ended up dating, and we just fell in love pretty fast, and she started helping me with these parties right away, and we became business partners at that point, and she helped me run the business all the way through to the very end. The ending of our business was tragic, and I'll talk about that later. But so Chris and I started running the business together in the loft. It made it a lot more fun to have somebody there like that, and we just were just really falling in love hard, and running these parties together, and we just started a life together. We did end up moving in together. Well, we were just really enjoying our life together. You know, we were both working full-time jobs, both running these parties on our days off, and it was just really fun. One night, Chris asked me, "Did you recognize anybody at this party? Did you know anybody?" I said, "No, I didn't. Now that you mention it, I didn't know anybody." So everybody was a complete stranger that was coming to these events, and it stopped being just friends and friends of friends, and it just became total strangers coming into my apartment, going to these art parties. And like I said, we had 24 people in there. Most of the parties would sell out because we were only doing about 1 or 2 parties a week. And so it became one of these things that was hard to get into. You really had to, get on the list quick, because the once we hit 24, we couldn't add anybody to the list. So if the party was sold out, then you couldn't come. That's basically how it was. So I said no to her. I did not recognize anybody. And she said, "Have you ever counted the money in the shoebox behind your dresser?" I said, "No." She goes, "Why don't you get that out and let's count it?" I was like, "Okay, that's cool. That's a good idea. I never thought about that." So we get the money out of the shoebox and we count it. It's full. And there was over $10,000 in the shoebox. My mission was to love people through art, and that was my main goal and my main mission. Loving people through art, that's what I thought about. And so every time we had an event, I was just trying to love people where they were, because people, life is hard and everybody has something going on, and people just need love. So that was my mission with the business, was to love people through my art, and that's what we were doing every day. When we counted the money, Chris said, "We have a real business here. This is a lot of money." I said, yeah, it is. You're right. And so we talked about it, and we both decided that it was time to take the next step. And that was to find a real location in our downtown area. We lived downtown in the loft, and so we were right there. We knew everybody at that point. I knew all the business owners, and there were some places for rent. And so we looked at all the places that were for rent. One came up that was on a side street, and I wanted the one that was on the main street for obvious reasons. But I had read a book by Richard Branson. He was talking about how he built Virgin Records. And he would always pick the locations that were on the side streets because the rent was cheaper. And so I decided to somewhat take that advice. We're already in a place where, no one knows where we are in the loft. So we became a destination business already. So we met with the landlord. It was on the side street in the beating hub of downtown. And we signed the lease. It was a 1-year lease. The rent was $12.50 a month. You have to put first month's rent, last month's rent, security deposit, and then we bought all new tables and chairs because we wanted everything to match and look good. We bought accessories and mop buckets and everything you could possibly need for a small business. We bought all that stuff, and we spent that entire $10,000 on opening this location. And we were both still working, so we did have that income coming in. So we started running the business out of this location, so it was open to the public. Chris talked me into getting a reservation software. We got the website up, we hooked up the reservation software, we hooked up the payment system on there. I started in the loft in 2010. By 2012, we were running full speed ahead with one location, and things were going well. We did almost run out of money a couple times, and I told Chris, "Hey, hold off on paying that power bill because we got to pay the rent." Then all of a sudden, one day, it just seemed like a rocket ship, and the business took off, and we had reservations out the door. And since we had the reservation software, we could set it out as many months as we wanted to. So we were setting this thing out 3 months in advance, and people were signing up and paying 3 months in advance with reservations, and it worked out beautifully. And it was a genius idea on Chris's part. An opportunity came our way about 6 months after we first opened our first location in the downtown area. It was a location about 30 miles north of where we were. We had a lot of money sitting in the bank from this business. I think we probably had $50,000 that quickly. And so we decided to roll the dice and open a second location that quickly, which some would say is a bad idea, but it ended up being a good idea. It ended up working well for us. So we opened a second location and we added that to our website. That location took off like a rocket ship, straight up. And it was, we had it staffed. We had great staff. We staffed the first location and the second location. and we were there, but we started hiring people. I'm big on systems, so I had created a lot of systems in the business that made it easier for other people to run the business and do the things necessary. And so we opened the second location. Money was coming in. The following year, Chris and I had a meeting, and we wanted to figure out what the business was missing at that point. And our parties were 18 and up. If you were not 18, you were not allowed to come to these events. And so there were no kids. And we decided that we should open a kids studio, same concept. So we found a location. It had the same vibe, the brick walls and the wood floors and things like that. And we met with the landlord, and the rent was a little cheaper, but we decided to go ahead. Our accountant really gave us the go-ahead on that because he said we were cash flush. I think at that point we had about $100,000 in the bank. We had the numbers. And so we opened the kids studio, and we called it Splattermania, and it was a huge hit. I mean, it took off just like the others. Essentially, everything we touched turned to gold. It was like the American dream, like I've never witnessed before. So we were running the kids studio, we staffed the kids studio, and so we had 3 places going at the same time, which was incredible. The year after that, all the studios were full. They were all sold out all the time, pretty much 100% sold out. So I felt like we were missing out somewhat on maximizing the sales because we couldn't fit anybody else into the businesses. And so I found a 4th studio, and it was slightly different concept. It was more private parties, kind of like what we started with. And we called that studio Sips Party Loft. And it was private parties only. So if you wanted to book that studio, you had to pay for around 12 people, I believe, is what our limit was. And that studio, major success. They were filling up the parties there, so we staffed that. And so this is all within the first 5 years of starting the business. So 2010, I had my first party. 2015, we had 4 locations. We had a staff of 15, including 2 managers. One manager ran the second studio, and the other manager was somewhat of an area manager, and we put him over all 4 studios. And at that point, I backed out. And that was a really hard decision for me because I didn't want to let go of it. I designed the business so that I could let go of it. I had the perfect staff in place, and so I remember the first night I did not come to one of the events. I was stalking the first studio, looking in from the outside, looking in just to make sure things were going well. It was comical. And my manager texted me and said, "Hey, you can go home now. I got this." And it was funny, and we all laughed. But so I let go that day. For the next 3 years, Chris and I did a lot of traveling. We had just a fantastic staff of people. And so we let go and let God, and we just let the business run. All the systems were in place. We had accounting, we had an attorney, we had the staff and managers, and Chris and I just traveled, and we went to all-inclusive Mexico trips a couple times a year, and we went to California wine country a couple times a year, and we did small trips, and we just enjoyed life, and we were living somewhat of a luxurious lifestyle. We did that for 2 or 3 years, I guess, and then in 2017 things just seemed complicated. We came back into the business. Everybody was still running the parties and everything, but we were back in observing the business. At the time, we had 4 rent payments, 4 power bills, 4 cable bills, 4 water bills, and 4 internet bills, and a staff of 15. And that was just costing too much money. And so we started thinking maybe we should consolidate the business. So at that point, we started talking and decided that we would entertain the idea of consolidating our locations into one big central location, because we were still a destination business. We had 4 studios going, and people were coming from all over. I mean, we dominated this market, and people were driving, 30, 40 miles to come to our business. And incidentally, this became one of the fastest growing industries in the country. They called it the sip and paint industry. And there were some companies that ended up having 300 locations. It was big. So in 2017, we decided that we were going to entertain the idea of consolidating our business from 4 studios down to 1 centralized location. And there was a city, a town that was central to everything. We did a lot of research. We pulled all of our zip codes for 5 years to find out where everybody was coming from. And so we decided on this one town. It was the fastest growing town in our community. And so we decided on that town. We were having dinner one night at our favorite restaurant. It was a steakhouse in that town. And it was in a beautiful building that was 5 stories tall. It was a brand new building, total luxury. And the steakhouse, we always sat at the bar. It was a very luxurious place. And we were talking to the owner, who we knew, and we were telling her what we wanted to do with consolidating our business. She said, "You might be in luck, because the space right next door is for rent. Nobody knows that yet, because they haven't put it on the market, but I can connect you with the owner of this building." I said, "Yes, please do it." So she connected us with the owner of the building, and we met with him at the location, and it was the most luxurious place I've ever seen. I mean, the windows in this place, it was 2 giant walls, floor to ceiling windows, which for an art studio that's just a dream. And to give you an idea of the size of this place, it was 1 giant room, 3 smaller rooms, and a whole nother room where the sink was, where we could keep all of our supplies. And it was massive. So we could fit just about as many, I take that back. We could fit as many people that fit in all 4 of our studios combined into this one location. So it would be so easy for people to get to, like super easy. You could see the highway from where we were standing inside of the studio. So we decided, this cost us quite a bit of money to do, because the other leases weren't up yet, and there was just no way of doing it any other way. So we had to pull the plug on all 4 locations all at the same time. We made sure that this one was ready to open. Before we did that, we bought larger tables, new chairs. Everything was brand new. The tables would seat more people. And so we got that studio ready to open, added it to the website, finished out all the other events that we had at the other studios, and closed them down for good. We moved all of the things that were in those 4 studios into our basement at our home. It filled up our entire basement. You couldn't even walk through it. So we had a stuff problem there. But we opened the new studio, and it was glorious. People absolutely loved it. We had a whole slew of new customers. So that was 2017. We consolidated all of those rent payments. We did cut back on the staff. We came back into the business, and we had 1 manager and 2 employees at that time. And we did save a lot of money by doing that. That's not why we did it, to be honest with you. We did it because the business was just too complicated, and we wanted to simplify, and it worked. Like that, what happened was exactly what we wanted to happen. It was simplified. Our employees and Chris and I, we started running this luxurious studio right next door to the most popular, best steakhouse in the entire community. And our parties were selling out. We had 45 customers in there every night. We were probably having about 7 parties a week, 7, 14, 28. So we were hosting probably 28 art parties a month at this location. And life was good. And it was just a fun studio to work in. I was glad to be back in the saddle. I needed that break. So 2017, 2018, 2019, We had been in this studio for 3 years. Life was good. It was simple. We didn't have to be there. We could stay home if we wanted to. And it was just it was the American dream, really. Starting a business that made a lot of money, and all in all, we had over 50,000 customers had come through our business, all of our different locations. You know, the average sale was $45. If you just do the math, 50,000 customers times $45 per person, it was good. You know, just if you don't know anything about business or entrepreneurship, you don't get to keep all that money, okay? That wasn't our money. It was just, there's something called the cost of doing business. And I wasn't out to get rich on this, and I didn't get rich. And but the cost of doing business and the money I made as a salary, it was totally worth it. We could have done that forever, really. So 2020, it was January of 2020, and a buddy of mine who lives in California and I were talking about what was happening in China with the pandemic. So I just thought, man, if that comes here, you know, nobody's going to want to come to an event-based business. But it came anyway. We had a 5-year lease in that building, which was fine because we were making the payments, no problem. But if you added up our lease, it was a $250,000 lease. So I signed my name to a $250,000 lease. That takes a lot of courage. We had this lease, and you know, the pandemic hit. This was in Illinois, okay? So different states had different reactions to the pandemic. So if you were a small business owner, the fate of your business depended on where you lived. Really, if you really think about it. So like if this business would have been in Florida or Texas, we would have survived. But we were living in Illinois, and our business was in Illinois. And so all the governors of every state did things differently. The governor of Illinois decided that he was going to close all non-essential businesses. Well, I mean, I thought our business was essential. Our customers sure thought our business was essential because they were receiving somewhat of a mental health boost every time they came. And many people came for that reason. We weren't an official art therapy business, but there is therapy in art. That's proven. But we were not allowed to stay open. We were forced to close our business in a day. I mean, it was a day, one day. During that time, if you didn't own a business, you wouldn't know this, but the landlords across the country, they still wanted their rent payments. So we were faced with having 0 customers and at that time a $5,000 a month rent payment. I was not sleeping, so we closed the business. We had to. We had no choice. The governor said we had to close, so we had to close. And we closed the business. We could have waited it out. You know, that was a risk, paying that rent every month, because, you know, they said 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Well, that was, I knew that wasn't going to be the case. I knew it was going to be a lot longer than that. In fact, in my mind, it was probably going to take a year or two, not just to get through that pandemic, but to get on the other side of it as a business. So we decided to just close down, like for good. There was no way we were going to be able to keep making that rent payment. We made that decision, and we cleared out the studio. We had been talking to the landlord, and after a while, they did graciously let us out of that big lease, but they didn't have to. They did not have to, and they did, and I thank God for that every day. So Chris and I did a video about that for our customers. We did a video, it was a live video on our Facebook page. We had built the second largest Facebook page in our community with 30,000 local fans and customers, something we were very proud of. We did that live video that day announcing that we were closing the business for good, and our customers were bawling in the comment section. They were literally bawling their eyes out, begging us not to do it, but we had no choice. We had no way to save this business. It was tragic. I mean, we were living the American dream. It ended in one day. It was absolute high-level tragedy. And so we cleared out the studio, and we had to hire a guy to help us with a U-Haul, and everything we owned in our business ended up in a storage unit, just stacked up, leaning inside of a storage unit. And I cried my eyes out. Chris and I cried buckets and buckets of tears. And this went on for me for months and really years. I mean, the whole thing, you know, it's taken me 5 years just to be able to tell this story. That's how devastating it was to me and to Chris. We're so far beyond that now. So I just felt like I was ready to tell this story, and I hope you guys will comment and let me know what you think about it and what your opinion is on all of that. But that's our story of Sips and Splatters and the American dream, and how ours was shattered. So we're living in a different world now. You know, I'm doing things online. I started an online painting class business on a website called Skool, Skool, and the business is called You Can Paint. It's currently free, but I am going to have a paid version that's more elaborate. That'll be, you know, $8 or $12 a month, something like that. But right now it's free. And I have this YouTube channel which is now monetized from my video about working at Lowe's in my retirement job. That's what I'm doing, and that's where we are. So I appreciate you guys sticking around and watching this video. It means a lot to me. And feel free to share it and like it and comment, and just show me some love, and let's make the world a better place. Love you guys. Bye-bye.